All right, let me take you back to the days of splendor when I had the honor to work with Cleveland legend Harvey P. Carr. He was the creator and writer of American Splendor, which gave birth to the autobiographical comic book. While I was in art school, illustrating for his comic book was the first freelance gig I got. And it was a day I'll never forget. It meant a lot to me. And I can't believe it's now been 40 years since that day. Where did the time go? It was just yesterday I was this little guy here who loved comics. I learned how to read from the comic books my mom gave me. I knew back then I wanted to be a cartoonist when I grew up. My parents thought I had a lot of talent, and they paid for my education at the Cooper School of Art, a highly regarded art school in the Cleveland area at the time. I will never, ever forget this wonderful thing they did for me. I'll always be in their debt, so thank you, Mom and Dad. I won't forget the day the dean of the school told me about a phone call he got from some guy named Harvey. He was looking for a cartoonist to draw for his comic book, American Splendor. From that title, I pictured a comic book about the adventures of George Washington and Abe Lincoln. That didn't sound cool like drawing a Superman comic book, right? I thought, great, it's going to be boring history stuff. Well, imagine my surprise when I found out that American Splendor was actually an underground comic book. There were no presidents. It was filled with gritty stories, four-letter words, and sex. Oh my. As a good young Catholic boy, I was sincerely worried that my parents would not let me draw for such a comic book. And you know, I didn't want to disappoint my parents. That meant a lot to me, so their opinion mattered. Well, my parents totally got it. You know, I don't know why I worried. It was ridiculous. I was a goofball back then, unlike the very cool guy you see here today. I remember the first time I met Harvey. I had to drive to the far east side, which for this West Sider was like going to a foreign country. I mean, the furthest place I drove to was the local record shop. So I was kind of nervous driving that way. I found his apartment, I knocked on his door, and I could hear Harvey running down the steps. Then I heard him leaping over steps, and then he just landed hard on the door, ripped it open, and said, "Are you Gerry?" "Yeah, I am." Harvey told me how American Splendor was really the anti-superhero comic book. He explained to me that the comic was based on real stories filled with real people. He also told me that he saw himself as the human tape recorder and that he would record everyday ordinary things like eating a bag of potato chips. I swear to God, that is how he described it to me. And I knew then I had to be the human camera to fully illustrate his stories. So I pretended I was a film director, and Harvey's stories were film scripts, and I shot hundreds of pictures of him like I was filming a movie, and I tried to make the art as realistic as possible as I could. In contrast, I loved how Harvey used these cute stick figures to illustrate his handwritten notes on his stories. And I told him, this is the real American Splendor, and that you should publish some of your stories like this. And I believe a few years later he told me he did. My favorite story I did for him, I'll be 43 on Friday, How I'm Living Now. I was nowhere near 43 when I originally drew that drawing, and now I'm nowhere near 43 today. Harvey wrote on one of the pages for me, "To Gerry, one of the finest comic book illustrators around today. He probably doesn't realize how good he is. That is the nicest thing anybody ever said about me, and I have it in writing." I was flattered that Harvey trusted me with his stories. He treated me as an equal in the creative process, and that meant a lot. He actually made me feel like a real artist, and I mean he made me feel like a real artist. But Harvey is the real artist. It was through his vision and his inspiration that always inspired me. Thanks, Harvey, for adding some splendor in my life. Thank you.